This is the paper, the Temple Calendar from Adam to Israel and the Early Church, number 156H. Now, the creation of the earth has caused a lot of confusion through, quite simply, the ignorance of many of the Christian systems who have not understood that there were two creations of the earth. The first one was by God the Father, and he created the earth many millions of years ago. And he created it basically by smashing two celestial bodies together. And our scientists are just finding that out now. And when he did that, he summoned all of the Elohim under their morning stars to be present at the creation of the earth. Now, that creation is referred to in Job. The book of Job was the first book of the Bible written by Moses when he was in Midian. Now, Job 38:4-7 talks about the creation of the earth, and it talks about how the morning stars were there and that all of the sons of God, as Elohim, were present. Now, the stupidity of modern Christianity in trying to claim that there was only two Elohim and that one of them was Christ and there wasn't any other Elohim present at the creation of the earth is a fictional system of a ditheist Godhead which doesn't really understand the function of what the Bible's saying. Christ was not co-eternal with the Father. He was one of the Elohim created, and they were all summoned from their various areas of the universe to be present when the earth was created, because it was a next necessary step in the enlarging of the creation of the sons of God as Elohim. Now, God created that as an elliptical spheroid, a more or less round structure, and the whole world knew that that's what he had done, and that the Elohim and the later creation of mankind also knew that it was an elliptical spheroid, that it was round. Now, this system, this round system, was organised so that it was under one of the morning stars. It was under what we call, and the Bible calls, the red dragon, Satan, or Satanel, or Azazel, are the various names he was given. Satan is the name he was given because he is the accuser, and he is the accuser of mankind. He and the fallen host did not agree that mankind should have been created as they were. Now, he knew what the plan of God was, and he started experimenting with humans about 1 million years ago, 930,000 years ago. That early creation of Satan got into trouble and it reached a bottleneck and lasted for about 170,000 years, where it almost was wiped out completely. It was not a proper creation, and it was an experiment. About 200,000 years ago, the experiment was modified to create Neanderthals and Denisovans, which are another branch of the Neanderthals, and then the Cro-Magnons, which was an upgraded version of humanoids, were created about 30-odd thousand years ago, and then they continued on. And about 13,000 years ago, there was a catastrophe, and the earth was rendered waste and void, or tohu and bohu. And that's when we get to the recreation, where God had to send the Elohim to the earth to recreate it, about 6,000 years ago. And that was recreated over a period, and they were all under Christ. And that recreation that occurred after the earth became tohu and bohu was recorded and listed in the Bible, and that is what's referred to in Genesis chapter 1 verses 1 to 18. That system of tohu and bohu was changed over a 7-day period. The plan was for the 7 days of the recreation to represent the lifestyle, that is the timing of the structure of the creation of mankind as to become Elohim. Now that's covered in paper number 001. That system was basically organised so that mankind, over the 7,000 years of the recreation, would then become Elohim, gods. All they had to do was obey God, do what they were told, and then keep functioning as obedient humanoids, that is the Adamic humanoid creation, and they would then be translated into Elohim. That is, they would become another type of being with the possession of immortality. They would be freed of this third-dimensional structure, and they would go into a fourth-dimensional structure as Elohim. So they would become just like the other Elohim, the sons of God, who were semi-immortal. That is, only God was immortal, but he confirmed and conferred eternal life on the Elohim while they were obeying him and doing as he had said. But they can be destroyed. They can be killed. And some of them, if they do not repent over the re-education program, which they will undertake at the second resurrection, will die. In the same way, humans don't have any immortal soul, and we'll deal with that immortal soul concept when we discuss the soul and through the structure of Ecclesiastes. But that system of immortality and the fiction of immortality was conferred on humans by Satan over this period. Now, in this recreation, God created the cycles. The earth was round, and of necessity it rotated on its axis, and that rotation was a period of 24 hours. He had created the sun and the moon so that they became the determinant factors of night and day, and they were part of that system. Somehow, during the Tohu and Bohu, that system had been interfered with so that it wasn't functioning correctly. That recreation under Christ, the 24-hour night and day periods were properly restored, and they could be observed and were observed. The other rotational cycle was the year period, where the rotation around the sun took a period of 365 and a quarter days, and that period then was determined also by the functions of the moon, where the rotation of the moon around the earth created the observation of the month, that is, from the conjunction. And this requires no observation by snotty-nosed humans whatsoever. The system is determined by God in the rotation systems around the earth and of the earth in itself, through the day and the moon for the month, and it goes from conjunction to full moon and back to conjunction again. Now, in this paper we explain all of that, and how the records were quite clear, and that Philo's references in the 1st century BC and CE show quite clearly what the phases of the moon are, and God determined all of this so that it is perfectly observable. It requires no human interaction, is perfectly observable as astronomical events which can be predicted in advance for hundreds and hundreds of years or thousands of years. These things are known and calculated, and were calculated by our ancestors on a perfectly correct basis. The entire calendar system was given by God to mankind from Adam. And that's the most important thing to get through our heads. This calendar was set up from the creation of Adam and went through all of the patriarchs to Noah. Noah could calculate the new moons of the first month and the new moons of the second month, and so on. The structure was all known and predicted, and the calendar was operated by the patriarchs through after the flood, down through to Abraham, Isaac and Jacob. They all knew how to calculate the calendar, and they knew the days God had set aside for them to use and to observe and obey. And the Sabbath was created at the 7th day of the recreation under Christ. Now, people prefer that Christ wasn't involved so they could mess around with the calendar, which is what they did. But the reality is that Christ was there and did give the calendar to Adam. He was there and closed the door on the ark and Noah understood all of it, as did the patriarchs before him, including Enoch, who was taken, and we will see again soon. It was given to the patriarchs, including Abraham, and down to Abraham. Melchizedek, the son of Noah, was established as the high priest at Jerusalem after the flood, and that system was established at Jerusalem, and the days were organised based on Jerusalem, and the entire calendar of the world at that time was calculated from night to night, EENT to EENT. And we know, how do we know that it was calculated to EENT? The reality is that end evening nautical twilight was the beginning of the day. The temple system worked on the observation where day did not begin until there were at least 3 mainstream stars visible in the night sky. That did not include Venus or Mars or the other planets. It was part of the mainstream star system, so that the sky was dark and the stars were visible. That was the beginning of the day. And that went through until the next day. Now we can see now the other cycles that are evident in the planetary systems, and the planetary systems determine these cycles. Now there is, in the ancient systems and the modern star systems, what is called a 19-year time cycle. Every 19 years, the Earth resets. But it doesn't reset exactly as it was. There's a 2-hour difference. And that alters the concept. The people who didn't know enough decided that the 19-year time cycle resets, therefore we can apply that all the way back to Christ's time and work out what days were what. Well, that's not true, because the 2 hours makes a big difference over 2,000 years. Now, the structure of the 19-year time cycle and the 2-hour difference has led many of the churches of God who didn't know any better to apply this 19-year and try and work out what was happening in the time of crisis. That led to error. And we've corrected some of those errors and suppositions. Now, there are other things. There is the solar cycles are dealt with, and we explain the solar cycles, and that these solar cycles operate in an observable 11.1 year cycle. These are very important aspects in terms of what's happening to the globe, to the Earth. Every 11.1 years we go through a solar cycle which sees fluctuations in the sun's activities, and we can observe those and measure them. And over 100 cycles, every 100 cycles, that's 100 cycles of 11.1 years, which is just over 1,100 years, there is a global warming event. This has got nothing to do with humans, nothing to do with carbon dioxide, nothing to do with what these people in the globalist structure and the New World Order advocates of these globalist communists would tell you. They are seeking to reorganise the earth under a system where they control it. And a system of elite globalists would do whatever to you they will in order to seize the control of the earth's resources and place it under their control. They are saying that man is responsible for this global warming. That is an absolute provable lie. And that will be stamped out very soon by the Messiah when he returns. These people will be stamped out of control and operations, and they will face the vials of the wrath of God, and under the fourth vial they will all be dealt with. We dealt with that in other papers, for instance on World War III, Armageddon and the vials of the wrath of God. If you haven't seen that, look at it. These solar cycles last for 50 cycles in this global warming. The ice caps melt in various stages, and depending on where they are, whether they're over land or sea, there's a lesser or greater fluctuation. If they're over the sea, there's a lesser fluctuation on those caps that are over water. The caps that are on land, there's a greater fluctuation, and the Atlantic, East Atlantic cap, for instance, has between 55 and 60 metres of ice on which, if melted, would raise the Earth's sea levels by a further 50 to 60 metres. The West Antarctic Basin has 5+ metres, 5.6 metres of ice, and the Greenland cap has a further X amount of ice, 5.5 metres of ice. Now, every 1100 years that one of those caps melt, the West Antarctic Basin melted. There have been 2 warm periods that we can prove existed and happened from our historical records, and the periods before then occurred also in that time sequence. But we know absolutely what happened in the last warm period, which was started in the 900s, the 10th century CE, and it lasted for 550 years, and in the year 1450 or so, the Earth lapsed back into the modern Ice Age. That created a very serious problem, and what happened then, of course, was that the land sea levels dropped by a further 5 metres, and some of the island chains in the Pacific came above water and were occupied from the 1400s onwards. Now, there was another period before that, which we called the Roman Warm Period, the RWP, and that occurred in the 2nd century BC and lasted through until 390 to 400 of the current era, where the Romans then, because of the decreasing temperatures, left Britain, and they moved back and concentrated around the Mediterranean, and the people began worshipping the sun god, and it's the ancient system of the sun worship where the Virgin brought the infant son, the invincible son, from the cave at the solstice. And that became into Christianity as the birth of Christ, but it wasn't. And it didn't come in until 375. That then brought the Dark Ice Age, which lasted for another 50 cycles until the 9th century. So this cyclical period of global warming is proven. Now, we also know that the levels of technology of the ancients at the 2nd century involved their capacity to measure longitude and latitude from a round earth, which of necessity requires an international dateline or a system somewhere out in the Pacific to maintain a calendar involving days and nights on a 24-hour basis. Now that's simple astronomical fact. There's nothing mythical about it, nothing mystical about it. It's a requirement to maintain a functioning calendar, and only an idiot would not understand that. Now, the flat earth theory was brought in the sun-worshipping cults in early Christianity from the 2nd century onwards, and the sun system and the worship of the sun cults at the solstice did not come in until 375 from Syria. And it's most important we understand that. And from that then on, they taught that there was a flat earth. Now, that idiocy only came into the church in the first 400 years after Christ. And it was not taught or countenanced by the churches of God from the 1st century onwards. Never. And the calendar at the temple was kept by the church on a continual basis. That's most important that you understand that. Now, these solar cycles are very important, and we've dealt with them in the global warming paper, 218C particularly. We've dealt now with the medieval warm period and the Roman warm period. The West Antarctic Basin was melted during the Roman warm period, and we have the maps of the West Antarctic Basin, and through the correct longitudinal, latitudinal relationships of the islands in the basin and South America versus Africa. We also see from the maps that there was increased water levels on the Sahara Basin, in what is now desert, but there were rivers mapped then on the Sahara Basin. Latitude and longitude was a functioning system, and there was transatlantic trade between Africa and South America from the time of David at least. We can prove that there was absolute transatlantic trade from the time of David and the 10th century BCE. The mummies from Egypt taken to the Berlin Museum were all tested by the scientists at the Berlin Museum, and they found that all of the mummies of the 10th century BC and onwards had had cocaine and tobacco residues in their hair. Now these are mummies, they can't be smoking when you move them around, they're dead, and they were, during their lifetime, engaging in cocaine use and also in tobacco. Now when that was published by the Berlin Museum some decades ago, the British Museum tested their mummies, probably trying to refute the claims of the Berlin Museum. Now, what they found was that they had no cocaine in their mummies, but every one had tobacco, which indicated that they must have been trading in tobacco across the Atlantic. We know for a fact that there was Roman trade across the Pacific because we've found the timetables of the Roman ships in ancient Latin. And we know the Latin was old because the timetables used 9 as VIII, 4 I's, instead of the later IX. So we know that that occurred. We know also that in Israel they had transatlantic trade because the Bar Kokhba rebels around the 135 under the time frames and the Hadrian expulsions went to America, and we've found their bodies, we've found their coins, and we've found their artefacts. Cyrus Gordon has published on that in the book Before Columbus, which is a very important work in terms of what was happening. We also know that in the 10th century CE, in the medieval warm period, Leif Erikson and the groups that went from Iceland into Greenland when the caps were melted under Eric the Red in 996 CE, went on, discovered America, went through, so-called discovered, they knew America existed, they went around and then they sailed up the Mississippi, and we found one of the longships which was wrecked there in Tennessee. So we know all of this was happening long, long ago, and that the myths that have come out of Europe come from the ignorance and the willful duplicity and misinformation from Rome and the Vatican systems in order to confuse the understanding of history. Now, there were other systems. I did say David had trade with them. We know that because the ships of Tarshish were maintained by Solomon through over in 1 Kings 10:22. The trade continued until Judah was destroyed and the Bar Kokhba rebels left Judea and settled in the Americas. What happened to them, whether they were all wiped out or they were absorbed into the tribes, we suspect that they were absorbed into the tribes. Now the other cycles were the zodiac and the galactic cycle, and the zodiac was invented to explain the astronomical progressions and resulted in stargazing worship of the stars and the moon and the sun, which is forbidden by God in the Bible in Deuteronomy 4:19 and Jeremiah 8:2. It's covered in F0242. The larger cycle is the galactic cycle, or year, which is 235 million years long. The Sun requires this time to complete a revolution of the galaxy. There's also a lesser cycle that is developed over 22,000, and now some are claiming 26,000 plus years, in which the polar system is determined. So our ancestors understood all of this and the progressions of the poles. the pole star. So these systems were operational. The recreation has been examined in the papers B5 and Creation versus Evolution B9, and there is a limitation on what happened and the age of this current Earth. It is not billions of years old. The previous systems were, from which it was created. Now, the plan of God is covered in number 001A, and Satan was aware of that, and he began creating these people. Now, the quotations from Genesis in chapter 1 and their reiteration, their structure in the paper, details what's happening through the period from Abraham, Isaac and Jacob through then when Christ had Moses deal with Pharaoh and bring Israel out of Egypt. Christ then reiterated the calendar, and he brought the manna systems into operation so that the Sabbaths and the new moons and the feasts were all determined by the manna in falling in accordance with the exact calendar system. That was then kept going until the manna ceased, and then in Israel the calendar was reinforced under the temple priesthood through the tabernacle and then the temple constructed under Solomon at Jerusalem, where Melchizedek, that is Shem, had established the system there. Now that calendar was enforced under Christ. He had the man gathering sticks on the Sabbath, stoned to death by the populace, as an example. And then there were a whole series of false arguments developed by the national systems in order to disrupt the calendar of God. They brought an observation system in so that they could observe the moon under the festival of the Mother Goddess system, the cult of Easter, or Ishtar. And that system was then transported into Judaism by many of these devotees who came into Judaism from the Canaanites, the mixed multitude, the Phoenician traders under the Herodian system, and the Edomites. These systems developed, and when the temple was destroyed, the Karaite heresy was developed. 156, we deal with that. There's also the mislocation of the moons is negated by the tidal systems, which operates according to the movement of the moon. The Sunday Sabbath argument is also a false argument derived from Hezekiah's reign, as we see in 2 Kings 20 verses 9-11 and the movement of the sun. See also Job 9, 6-9 and Psalm 104:19, where a day was lost. And so Sunday is then advanced as the true Sabbath. It's a false doctrine. We explain why it's a false doctrine, and that even the Sunday worshipping systems themselves do not use that in justification. calendar at Jerusalem on the day established the system from the Garden of Eden under Adam, and then the patriarchs from Jerusalem, and Jerusalem became the centre of the calendrical system over the entire period of the 6,000 years. Now, another false argument was sunset, that sunset is the end of the day. That is a lie. The reason sunset was brought in was by the Jews to establish a fence around the Torah, a wall around the Torah, so that the Sabbath day was made a 25-hour day from sunset on the Friday through to end evening nautical twilight on the Sabbath. The day does not end at sunset. Now, the temple calendar at the time of Christ was according to the new moons, and the new moons were kept as Sabbaths. Now, the new moon, Philo describes as being calculated in the astronomical schools in advance, well in advance, and they went from conjunction to conjunction, so that the conjunction was the beginning of the month. And Philo then includes the 10 feasts of Israel, and we've dealt with those, all stemming from the fourth commandment. The fourth commandment covers the Sabbaths, new moons, and all of the feasts, and including the wave sheaf, and through to tabernacles. The last great day is included in the Feast of Tabernacles. The Passover and unleavened bread is 8 full days, and the 14th of Abib is the Lord's Supper, and was set aside from the giving of the law at Sinai, and became the important structure on a continual basis, so that the new moons were kept, and even under the Romans at the latter days, before the temple was destroyed, the Romans kept the high priest's garments and issued them on Sabbaths and new moons and feasts for the high priest to officiate on those Sabbaths, and all of them were Sabbaths. So all of that is covered in this text. All of it shows you that the Hillel system is absolutely false. It was invented in 358, 328 years after the death of Christ. It has nothing to do with the church. The Church of God has never kept Hillel until the heretic Herbert Armstrong introduced it into the 20th century churches of God in North America. And that has to be removed and will be stamped out by Christ in the near future.